Papa, give me a word. What saddens me is seeing believers who then message me, this man of God took all of my money. This man of God, because all the prophets, many prophets on Facebook are for profit. If you don't sow, you don't get a word. People are not going to sit there and just prophesy. Only Hungry Jen just kind of ministers, and only at the end when everybody logs off, we're like, hey, by the way, you can give. People don't do that. People do that for living, and I understand worker is worthy of his wages and everything, but so much rip-off that happens. And then you find out the lives of these people where they are toxic, where they are hurt, they are rejected. Listen, and just because you can prophesy really well, it does not mean that you have a character. It does not mean that you have marriage. It does not mean that you are not watching porn. It does not mean that you're not smoking drugs or taking mushrooms. It does not mean that if you switch religions, you cannot go in and become a professional psychic. Some people that I hear, I'm like, man, you can be a perfect psychic, and there's no Jesus mentioned, there's no salvation. Everything is about just speaking goodness and love and peace and all of this stuff. So we have to be very careful as Christians. I'm not saying to walk around being afraid. I'm talking about being devoted to God, that we are not desperate at the expense. And what I want to encourage is this: God wants to communicate to you within your community. God spoke to David, but have you noticed? From a priest, probably some kind of a small guy that didn't matter. God spoke through him. When Saul tried to communicate to God in his community, God was silent. The problem wasn't the lack of the gift in his community. It was the lack of the character in Saul. It wasn't that Saul now needed to find another, because there was no other prophet. It's not that Saul now needed to go against someone else. Saul needed to fix the connection. And so sometimes people would, switch churches. So they were like, man, but I don't hear anything from God. Well, it will help if you come to church. It will help if you will be in the community. It will also help if you develop a quiet time with God where your phone is turned off and you actually connect to the Lord. So if the Lord is not communicating, don't rush to switch the community. Watch, say, is there a connection personally with me? Because this God communicated before. God communicated to Saul before. The fact that God stopped communicating, it wasn't a reason for Saul to start going right now DMing every person on IG or DMing everybody on Facebook and say, give me a word, give me a word, give me a word. All Saul needed to do is to find, where is the reception? Is my receiver off? If I put it on mute, wait, do I even have it? Where did I lost it? And we're going to see in just a moment what happened with Saul, why God stopped speaking to him. But I want to encourage you to listen to God in the community. Your pastor, your leader, your mom, your dad, your spiritual brother and sister who helps you to walk along does not have to have a prophet in front of their name on Facebook to discern God's will for your life. I remember when I was extremely passionate to move to Seattle. This passion and vision to start a church in Seattle birthed out of the fact that I offered my pastor one idea and he rejected it. And after that I started to feel strong discernment that God is calling me out of Hungry Gen. Weird. And all the things start lining up right away. I start gathering, and this vision to start a church in Seattle wasn't mine. It was my pastor's vision. He wanted us to start a church in Seattle. We prayed for a whole year here after worship. So after our worship, and so a month and a half I'm already developing a team. I already talked to a few people in our church. They're like, yeah, we'll move with you. And so I'm thinking, yeah and stuff. So, but when that is fostering on the ground and the soil of offense already, it's not God. And so I remember right there in the last row with the pastor, it was evening, we're sitting, and so and I was like, so this Seattle idea, I'm like, I'm willing. And I was willing to sacrifice, sell the house, give all the money away, move from zero, move into an apartment and start everything from zero again. I was willing to die. Literally, I was willing to die. And I'm telling my pastor, what am I willing to do? And he said, you don't need to do that. He says, you need to be here. He said, you need to be the one to release other pastors to start campuses. He says, this is your home, this is your base, and you shouldn't be going anywhere. I said, you sure? I said, what happened? Who's going to go to Seattle? He says, we're praying to God. Let God figure that out. He says, you don't have to be the one. He said that, just that. He's like, when you will be there, he's like, you will be alone. I was like, I'll be connected to Hungry Gen. He's like, yeah, 3.5 hours. He says, that's it. He put a needle in my little awesome revelation to change my life. And I thank God He saved me. I thank God. And I left, I told my wife, and I said, like a truckload is off of my shoulders. I mean, I know what it's like to start construction of the church, building the team and everything here from the beginning. I know the pain, I know the suffering. I'm still dealing, we're still growing pains and everything. Why in the world did I want to move to Seattle to start that again?